On this installment of RIA Stories, I'm speaking with Rob Sandrew, who's the Chief Revenue Officer at Integrated Partners. If you are new to RIA Stories, this is a series focused on helping advisors who are looking for a new home with a national RIA. And the setup is simple. I interview guests in the same way I coach advisors to start their due diligence process when talking to new RIAs about potential affiliation.
This is the Resilient Advisor Show with Jay Coulter.
Rob, thank you so much for coming on RIA Stories.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
All right, let's dive right in. We like to break this up into sections. In the first section, let's talk about the firm and give a firm interview. Where does your firm fit on the spectrum of independence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, looking across the scale, we're very far, in terms of open architecture, a significant amount of autonomy for advisory teams. I think that's what we're known for, our ability to allow advisory teams to really operate their business model in the way they want to, but we're providing a fair amount of resources to help them amplify their business model.
Excellent. And we'll get deeper into that. And I forgot to mention at the start, if you would like to download the Resilient Advisor Guide to due diligence, just head on over to riastories.com and you can follow along as we go through the interview process. So Rob, what exactly are the affiliation options with your firm?
Yeah, so the affiliation options are, we started the firm with a 1099 option. We're moving towards a W-2 as well as 1099, but then we have kind of, we'll call iterations of at least the 1099 side where we're in the process. We've done this with a number of groups internal thus far, buying a portion of their business. We may buy, say, top line revenue versus buying equity of the group, full acquisition. So we're really providing a fairly broad kind of options in terms of how advisory teams join us and what that looks like. And that dovetails very nicely into, your first question about, how the independent spectrum and where we land on it. We're about choice. We're about flexibility and giving, a significant amount of, we'll call it agility to these businesses.
All right, so let's take a step back and go through the history of the firm. Could you walk us through how you started and maybe talk about your locations, AUM, number of advisors?
Sure. The firm was started back in the mid-90s by Paul Sagney, who is the founder, obviously, but he's the CEO of the firm today. He's actually an advisor as well. He's got a small subset of clients today. But the reason Paul decided to start the firm is he was at an organization called Cigna. They are now called SageMark. Cigna is or was a firm that would go in, work with high-end families, generally speaking, go into a lot of the private banks and do high-end advanced planning, estate planning, insurance work. So Paul was hired. He was in New England running Cigna's basically Boston office. And he would go into the private banks and work with these very large families back in the, late 80s, early 90s. We're talking, a few $100 million, which is significant wealth today, but certainly significant wealth back then. He'd go and he'd do all the work, he'd build a relationship. And ultimately what would happen is that project would be concluded. Paul would be paid a fee, or Cigna would be paid a fee, exit the relationship. And then the bankers would essentially, take on that relationship and get paid in perpetuity. And Paul thought, okay, this is half the model. So that really was the catalyst for him to build out what is now Integrated Partners, in the sense of providing a full service platform so that advisors really can go into, whether it's $1 million client, $100 million client, even $1 billion client, and provide a fair amount of resources, have the experts within our organization that can essentially sit shoulder to shoulder with that advisor, that advisory team, and go in and support that type of client.
Rob, what year did he launch Integrated Partners?
He launched Integrated in 1996 in Boston, actually.
In Boston, okay. How many locations do you have today?
Today, we actually have over 65 locations. So to maybe round out a little bit more on that origin story. So when Paul was looking to build out the firm in Massachusetts, that coincidentally tied in with Mass being the first state to allow for CPAs to take, way back when, commissions. They made some changes to their regs, and What Paul had noticed when he was working with Cigna is that these high-end families, they're very private. And what he saw was that the most trusted advisor tended to be that tax advisor. So Paul thought, okay, this is really interesting. I'm launching this firm. Massachusetts changed the regs to allow for centers of influences, particularly CPAs and attorneys, to enter into the financial services arena. And Paul thought, okay, if we can build out a CPA program in particular, that will essentially be a significant organic growth lever for advisors, where those CPAs are introducing their highest net worth clients to the advisors. That could be a huge win. So we built the CPA program right at the start of Integrated Partners. We used to be called Integrated Financial Partners. So Paul started it in New England. We had a heavy concentration in that New England, Mid-Atlantic region for a number of years. We were, previous to going independent, we were at Lincoln Financial, and then ultimately made the break to independence in 2016. At that point, we were around 100 advisors, actually, with about $3.5 billion of assets. And what I always find to be really fascinating, one of the reasons I joined the organization, is when Paul ultimately decided to make the move to independence. I mean, Jay, you've seen this. Typically, a firm that's leaving, say, more of a captive environment and going independent, if they have a number of advisors, they're probably going to lose a fair amount of them. We actually took 97 out of 100 advisors with us, which is a huge testament to Paul, the leadership of the team, the culture. I'd say in this order: leadership, culture, then capabilities, right? Built a really strong, I think, following because of the fact that, it's a study group, kind of a coaching, mentoring, training environment, helping build processes, all the resources. And Paul's pretty strong visionary in terms of where the market's going and how to essentially maneuver or evolve. And it was, it's a huge testament to the organization. So when we went 2016 into the independent arena with 97 advisors, $3.5 billion, that was a pretty big phase of our business. Fast forward to today, we're around 18. We just crossed over 18 billion just last month, and we have 212 advisors across the country. So our footprint today is more national, most definitely. Strong presence both on the West and East Coast today. I'm in San Diego, so we've got a significant presence in Southern California, Pacific Northwest, down in some of the Southwest as well. Heavy on the East Coast, and then we're certainly making some headway in some of the major metropolitan areas across the country.
All right. Is the home office still in Boston?
The home office is actually now it's dual headquartered, so Boston as well as in San Diego.
Okay. And then how many non-advisor employees do you have between those two locations?
So in terms of home office employees, I'm not talking about administrative staff for the advisory teams, we have 70 employees.
Okay. And then last question, as it relates to the overall overview of your firm, culture is so important inside an organization, and sometimes it can be hard to describe, but would you mind taking a shot at describing the culture at Integrated Partners?
The first thing that comes to mind is, I said it before, entrepreneurial. It's very entrepreneurial minded. It's, we are, we're working with these advisory teams that they're not coming to us to essentially hand the keys over to us and have everyone essentially look and feel the same way. They're coming to us because we're helping them essentially execute on their dream, on their vision, on their goals, right? And it's, it's very, again, like they're running a business. I would say that we're very focused on working with advisors that either have a practice, but they want to make it a business, or have a business and they want to amplify that business, right? And I think that's the mindset within the employees within Integrated, is that, we're helping essentially these advisory teams continue to meet their goals. And I think the culture component is a very strong part of the organization, and one in which, it's been interesting because I've been there since almost 8 years now when we went independent. So it's interesting to watch where we were then versus where we are now. And we were 25 employees back in 2016, 2017. So obviously we've just about tripled our employee base, but the communication is key, right? Making sure that everybody understands where our mission, ultimately, how we're going to get there, and spending a fair amount of time building transparency across the organization. So this is a little cliche, but I do really sincerely feel this way. It is a little bit of a family. It's interesting. The first conference I went to that Integrated hosted was I really was, it validated me joining the firm because it felt like a family. Everyone was genuinely very happy to see one another, advisors, staff, everyone. And it just continues to be that way. So we're very focused on bringing in the right groups. And again, this is cliche as well, but it's true. Right groups that are not going to disrupt that culture.
Excellent. Well, Rob, I like to break these due diligence interviews down into sections. And the first section we want to attack is how you guys support advisor growth. So, let's just start with the basic questions. Like, do you provide marketing support for your advisors?
I would say the answer is yes on that, but taking it up another level, I would say we are known. I'd like to think we are known in the industry for our ability to help advisors grow. I'm a big believer that all growth is not created equal. And we're very focused on helping advisors grow by going up market, right? So we provide a significant, obviously we'll get into some of those growth levers like the CPA program, et cetera, but marketing is a very big component of it. Our mindset, just in general, is we want advisors to essentially focus on what they do best. And Jay, you and I have talked about it before. How many, on a day-to-day basis, how many things do advisors have to really focus in on? There might be 30, 50 things that they could ultimately focus on a day in terms of their business. How many do they want to focus in on? And let's be honest, how many are they good at? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to free up some time, bring in experts across, our business line, our firm, to help with things like marketing, obviously middle, back office, things like that, but also some of those other areas that are more growth oriented to allow the advisor to do what they do best, which generally is building relationships.
All right. So when you think about your advisors and the success they've had after affiliating with your firm, is there a story you could share for viewers that really hammers home the power of the growth support you have?
Yeah, we like, as we've evolved, I think we've become a little bit more systematized, and I'm saying that in a very positive way, and process oriented. And part of that is gathering data and understanding. Data is key. Like you can't hide, right? And I think we've done a really good job of understanding where where our gaps are, and where we're succeeding. And one of those data points in terms of success is our organic growth numbers. Our organic growth across the firm is in the mid-teens, and for the larger teams, the top 25 of our organization, we're pretty close to 20% on an annual basis over the last 5 years of growth. And we're not talking about like a small team. These are significant groups. What we've seen in terms of kind of recurring themes amongst the most successful groups is they tend to be in our CPA program. They tend to outsource things that are not their focus. And they built significant processes. A lot of that, again, goes back to the training, coaching, mentoring environment we have, but they've really leaned in heavily on our resources, and we've seen a lot of success on that.
So does your organization provide access to M&A capital?
Yes, we do. We are helping advisors. When you say M&A capital, meaning an advisory team that's looking to go purchase another group, I assume. We're not necessarily going to provide them direct capital, but we have sources that we are leveraging, and our economies of scale certainly help with that. I'd say there's a couple components to that. Obviously, the capital is one, but providing some expertise along the way. Certainly myself and my colleagues, my team, we see a lot, right? We have a pretty good understanding of where the market is, the pitfalls. Certainly advisors sometimes get very excited. They see an opportunity and they want to grab it. And, it's our responsibility. It's like a fiduciary responsibility to slow them down. Let's take a look at it. Let's make sure that it is the right fit. On 50,000 feet, it might be great, but you start peeling back the onion and you want to make sure that ultimately it's a sustainable practice. It's going to fit, and there's the economics. I mean, you and I could spend hours on where valuations are, and it's just crazy. So we just want to be very prudent and provide our intellectual capital, our experience to these advisory teams to better help them navigate the M&A world.
Yeah, I tell you, Rob, I think that's a very important point that I want to make sure viewers and listeners understand. There's a lot of businesses for sale, and they're asking ridiculous prices. And what you're saying is giving your expertise and experience as a firm in these types of transactions. Not only are you providing the capital, but really the due diligence required to make sure it even makes sense from a business perspective. Is that correct?
It is correct. I mean, it doesn't just stop at the M&A side. It's like for us, when we're looking at a new advisory team to join, there's been many times where we really have a connection with a group. Really, it looks great. And then as you start to peel back, there may be reasons it doesn't work. And I think you have to have a North Star. You have to stay focused on it, be disciplined. And it's hard. It's really hard. I mean, to be honest, Jay, this morning I actually begged off. We decided to walk away from a deal, and we really liked the people. We saw this vision; it could work, but the multiples were getting out of hand, and it just, it's one of those that the scales tipped in the other direction. It didn't make sense for us, and we have to. What my goal and our team's goal is to bring this discipline into an advisory team's kind of DNA as they're looking at opportunities out there, because it's like the culture component. One misstep can cause a significant ripple effect within the organization.
Yeah. Well, tell me, let's wrap up this section with succession planning opportunities. Are there any inside your firm? How do you cultivate those?
Yeah, we made it a policy a number of years ago. We've been around, like I said, since the mid 90s. So you could argue we've learned a lot by, what not to do ultimately by some of our missteps. And one of those was, we had an advisor unfortunately pass away a number of years ago, and we were not prepared. The advisor didn't have the proper succession plan in place, and we ended up scrambling. So what we've done is we made a policy that every advisor at the organization has to have a succession plan. That doesn't necessarily mean an individual advisor. We will act as a backstop. We are a succession plan for a number of practices internal, but we want to provide that type of opportunity for the advisors. But we're also out there, certainly matchmaking, if you will. We've got 200 plus advisors. We're certainly trying to make sure that, if there's when there isn't a backup plan in place, that we try to match that up. And if it's not there, my team's responsibility is to go out and identify a succession plan and bring them in. But we'll provide everything from assistance on the succession planning documents. Part of this obviously is the valuation component. We'll bring in a third party to do the valuation. There's some capital, potential capital assistance, things like that we get involved in.
All right, Rob, let's pivot. Let's talk about wealth management support at a high level, and then dig inside the organization. Sure. So do you provide investment services for your advisors?
We do. We have, again, your first question about, I guess it's going to keep coming back to it in terms of the independent scale. Let me start by saying we're open architecture. We're not forcing advisors into anything. So that being said, we have, 18 billion, and I'd say, certainly more than less than half of our assets are in our own portfolios. So we're providing choice to the advisory teams, and we built out pretty significant platform with a number of different model programs for advisory teams. And there's things like what we call essentially a custom model, which is at a certain AUM threshold for an advisory team. We can come in and we'll collaborate with that team and build out a series of models. And we'll obviously take into account tax impact, all of those things. But it's not just here's some models and you've got to figure out how to get into that box, so to speak. This is, we're going to work with you. It's a significant group, and they have obviously capital gains. They have some issues there from a tax standpoint, as well as other things, and they want to have the accounts managed a certain way. We can come in and facilitate that, But what we're trying to do is provide, again, some choice to advisors. So we brought in individual by the name of Steve Colano. He's our chief investment officer. He was previously at Bank of New York Mellon, a pretty senior position on the outsourced CIO and family office side. And he's been building out a series of portfolios. We have a very significant investment platform with over 30 folks that are actually supporting that platform, trading, reporting, all the operational components. We have access to 15 CFAs. So there's a lot of, there's kind of a lot of meat on that bone, so to speak.
And all those resources in-house, or do you outsource some of that?
We have done a joint venture. We're about to announce the firm soon, but it's one in which we wanted to, again, we're amplifying our own business model by going out and partnering with another firm that's really well known in the outsourced CIO model. So we wanted to take our expertise and then couple it with this group that gave us a significant amount of bandwidth underneath the hood.
And then what's the cost structure for the investment platform to the advisor and client?
Yeah, it's I don't really want to get into the numbers because it's all circumstantial in terms of the particular advisory group, but we look at things from a household perspective. And what we've been able to do through some of our tech is we provide, again, some flexibility, right? Where some of that platform fee, all of that platform fee could be passed on to the client if that's something the advisor, does today, let's say. And it's something where we can kind of move that dial up and down on a per client basis. But we're including obviously things like trading in there. We use Orion. Our reporting cost is embedded in the platform fees, things like that.
All right, Rob, I've known you for a long time and your organization. This is the biggest softball question you'll get today. What can you tell us about the financial planning resources at Integrated Partners?
Oh, how long do we have? So we started the organization through a financial planning lens, and our DNA is just that, right? Everything we've built is like interconnected from a planning perspective. So as we continue to build out the platform, that is absolutely integral to us. Our thought process around planning is that when it comes to wealth management, everything emanates from a planning approach. Obviously, other people have different opinions on that, but that is really kind of a must when we talk to an organization or an advisory team that wants to join us. They have to have a similar philosophy in mind. Otherwise, we're probably not a great fit. But what we've done is we built out significant planning resources, advanced planning, estate planning resources, obviously blocking and tackling. Going back to what I said before about really having advisory teams focus on what they do best, we've been able to effectively increase their bandwidth by having them outsource a lot of the case design work to us. And that's part of the economics. So what we ask of an advisory team is they go out, they have a prospect or a client. We just need a fact finder to understand what exactly the inputs are, if you will, of a plan. And then we will design the case for them in conjunction, of course, with the advisory team. But we're trying to take a lot of that legwork and take it off their plates to really assist. But as you move up that complexity, we call it the complexity curve, moving up the client sophistication in terms of, their situation may be very sophisticated. We provide a lot of resources and it gets, very nuanced and nichey, and it doesn't just stop at like the advanced or estate planning side. I think it's, again, connected to, say, insurance. We do a lot of more sophisticated insurance strategies as well that actually is very much dovetailed into the planning process that we built. So advanced planning, estate planning, we built out a business owner platform, a family office platform, that all connected to planning.
And then what's the cost structure to the advisors for the planning platform?
The cost structure to advisors, essentially, it's wrapped into our we'll call it our baseline, our baseline pricing schematic. So, one of those things that we're doing is if an advisory team wants to leverage us for case design work, they have a case, let's say, that they just want a second opinion, or they need some guidance on, what to essentially build out, et cetera. That's part of our service. We do provide additional services like, in many cases, we'll get involved in the sense of we'll fly out to a client. It might be a $50-100 million client, something like that, where the advisor feels that they may have some, meaning that advisor may have some gap in terms of their skill set and knowledge, and they want to bring in, kind of we'll call it a subject matter expert. And in many cases, we may be involved, we may take the lead. So we slightly change the economics in that scenario. But I'd say 95% of the time, it's embedded in the baseline cost of the pricing schematic.
All right, so let me go a little deeper, because this
Sure.
is important. That's an incredible value add. An advisor comes across a $4 million opportunity. It has a little bit of complexity to it. The firm will do the financial plan for the advisor, and there isn't
Right.
an extra charge.
Correct.
Yeah, that.
Can I take it one step further, though? Give you another scenario to
Please.
kind of compare and contrast. So let's say, again, I'm going to give myself a little commercial here. So the CPA introduces a business owner to an advisory team. The business owner ultimately wants to sell. The potential valuation of that business owner is, let's say, $300 million. Most advisors can probably do maybe a quarter to a half of all the things that need to be done to ultimately get that business owner to a good spot to ultimately sell, and then, the proceeds, et cetera. So that's where we tend to shine. We're coming in, we've got folks in house that are experts on the exit planning side. We have an individual who does a lot of the business owner work, he's a non-practicing estate planning attorney, master's in taxation. He'll come in and provide a lot of that front end work that needs to be done. And then we're bringing in our insurance specialists, we're bringing in our investment team. So there's just a lot of moving pieces. So there may be additional costs there, because we're not talking about, an advisory group coming into our organization, spending an hour. We're talking about, this is probably 100 plus hours of work with a lot of, intense behind the scenes work as well. So there would be some sort of economic, change there because of the resources we're providing. But typically what we see is advisors appreciate that, because generally speaking, they wouldn't, they wouldn't have the opportunity necessarily because that, they now have it with the CPA program. But B, it's one of those things where one of our guys internal who's in Boston, he's got a Boston accent, and it's pretty funny because they'll be like, he can't say car, he can't pronounce his R. So he will talk about what happens when a dog chases a car and actually gets the car, right? This is one of those scenarios where what happens when an advisor, chases a business owner client and they don't have the necessary resources, understanding, experience to actually execute. That's where we come in and we shine.
Man, that's a very robust offering, as is your tax offering. Could you speak to the tax program that you have at Integrated?
Well, just to be clear, we don't do taxes internal. We certainly, none of those CPA firms, and I know we'll get into that, but none of the CPA firms that we work with, we don't own any of them. It's a partnership. It's almost like a JV that we'll get into. But what we're doing is we're almost going, we're going pretty far to that line. And we are bringing in an expert, right? So I think one of the big value adds in my mind of our organization is helping advisors build process with other column advisors. And what I mean by that is like the tax advisor, the estate planning attorney. There might be, an outside insurance specialist, whatever it may be, but there has to be a significant amount of coordination. Right. So we can, and we do provide a lot of resources and expertise around, trust structures and things like that. We'll get right up to the line. For example, on the estate planning side, we're not writing documents, but we are providing, essentially the information and the guidance to the estate planning attorney to actually execute on those documents.
All right. And let's wrap up with alternatives. What type of
Sure.
support do you provide for alternative allocations at the firm?
I think that's a really hot subject in this day and age, right? So we, one of the reasons that we brought in our CIO, again, Steve Colano from Bank of New York Mellon, was his expertise on that higher end side of things. So the family office side, the outsourced CIO model, we're building out an alternative platform as we speak. We're using one of the usual suspects on on that side. But I think we're in a very good spot. There aren't really any gaps. And as we move up, kind of we evolve as an organization. Again, we built out a family office that continues to evolve. We're going to add more complexity around those alts as we go.
All right, let's pivot to the next section and talk about technology support. Hard to start without beginning with your custodians. Tell me, who are you currently working with?
Custodial wise, we're working with Fidelity and Schwab. We have a relationship as well with LPL, and on that, essentially, if there's some brokerage, that's generally where the business goes. But we've built some pretty deep relationships with all three.
Okay. And has the organization been fired by a custodian in the past? And if so, what happened?
Very interesting question. No, we have not. No, I'd say if anything, we pride ourselves on our policies and procedures internal. I think that's actually been recognized by a couple of these custodians where they've referred business over to us because they feel that we have very tight processes from a risk perspective in place. If anything, if you look across our relationships with let's talk about Fidelity and Schwab for a second. We are in their top tier in terms of service model. The partnership is very robust. Again, it goes back to what I talked about before in terms of culture and transparency. I think we're doing the same thing with our partners. We're just trying to work with them, and it's a two-way street. Growing up as a salesperson, I always get frustrated when one side of a transaction or one side of a partnership is really just focused on themselves. That's not how we operate. It has to be mutually beneficial. That's something that was instilled in me at a very early age in terms of my training. And I take that, that's kind of my opening salvo when we work with whether it's custodian, technology provider, whatever. We're not going to sit there and try to push so hard that it doesn't make sense for them. Right. And I think that's fair. And that's the way. And it typically is appreciated. And it allows us to build some trust, which is extremely important. And then from there, it's kind of proof of concept. Let's go out and let's bring business to you, and business is referred into us, and it's kind of a win-win.
What CRM system are you using, and how do you use it as a support tool?
So we are, again, we're very open architecture, right? So as it relates to CRM, we typically support all CRMs. What I'd say typically is the two most common CRMs we see, of course, Redtail and Wealthbox, right? But at the end of the day, I'd say that advisory teams are leveraging the CRMs, are putting all their notes in there, client meetings. So from a regulatory standpoint, we can see that, we're trying to help them streamline.
Okay. And you had mentioned Orion earlier. Is that the exclusive portfolio trading and accounting system?
Yes, it is. So, we look at, we very much appreciate and value technology, right? But we also view that as it is a must. Like, it is table stakes for us to enter into essentially a discussion with a team. We have to have extremely solid tech platform. We have to have extremely solid, obviously, legal compliance, et cetera, middle back office. Those are 100% foundational things that we're extremely focused on. We're always looking out to see from a tech standpoint where we can help increase, as cliche as it is, increase efficiencies for advisors. And there's a lot of tools out there, as well as internally, how we can increase efficiency. So we went out and said, okay, there's only a handful of major portfolio systems, if you will. So let's make sure we're working with one of them, because chances are they're going to be around for the long haul. So we went out a number of years ago and started a relationship with Orion. It's been a very, again, mutually beneficial relationship, I'd like to think.
Okay. So that actually sets up the next question. Have you changed portfolio trading systems on your advisors?
We have not. No, we have not. It was like we continue to evolve. I mean, again, I used to work on Wall Street, and I always used to find it really interesting when these firms would go out and build proprietary technology. and it was meaning like Wall Street firms. And it was always interesting to me because like you've got so many lines of business and you're trying to essentially build like let's say a portfolio system, which it's not like you stop building it. Now you're building it and it's a freight train, right? So it's moving as fast as possible and you're trying to build on top of it. And that isn't your core function, right? So that's why we decided to go with one of the leaders out there in Orion, because they're obviously, they're one of a handful of firms that really dominates the industry. They continue to innovate. They are very well funded. It's like as much as I think a lot of RIAs want to kind of, reinvent the world from a tech standpoint. It's like that's not what we're focused on. We're focused on providing the right technology, but we want to work with firms that are specializing in an area. They're the ones that are watching where the industry is going and innovating as things evolve.
All right, and then your open architecture, but do you have a preference as it relates to planning tools for your advisors?
Generally speaking, e-money is a big planning engine within the organization. As I mentioned before, we do a lot of that case design work, and we use e-money as the kind of the engine for that. We also use things like Calistaplan, a few other tools out there, but it really starts with e-money. Now, if an advisor uses, say, Money Guide Pro or another planning engine out there, that's okay. But it wouldn't, essentially that does inhibit some of the bandwidth that we provide, right? Because we're doing case design work with an e-money engine. So, generally speaking, I'd say 99.9% of the time, if a team has used a third party, another planning engine, when they come in the door, they have converted over to e-money.
Let's pivot. Let's talk about operational and compliance support. Generally, when advisors are first starting their due diligence process, they don't pay enough attention to this section. I argue to folks that this is the most important section to pay attention to, because if a firm isn't optimizing for operations and compliance, it leads to so many other problems, as you know. So let's go deep. What can you tell me about the operational support team at Integrated Partners?
Well, our operations are centralized. And what I mean by that is, we provide. Again, these are businesses. See, the advisory teams are running their own business. They generally, let me start there. They have, they tend to have a business entity. They're 1099 with us, but they may mean the advisors, but they usually have W-2 employees underneath, right? And those W-2 employees tend to do some of that middle office work, and then they lean heavily on us for the back office. Right. So we've centralized our back office. So a lot of in that instance, so let's say we've got a team in, San Diego, where they have, we have a pretty significant team. I'll use them as an example. They've got 3 advisors and 3 staff, right? The 3 staff are helping with things like account opening, with kind of the day-to-day middle, I'll call it, office type functions. But when things go deeper, they're going to lean on us. Any sort of escalation issue, we tell our advisors, well, why would you call into a custodian? Why would you certainly call Orion? Bring it to us, right? Bring it to us. We're going to go to our people, because Orion and whoever it is, they're looking at us as a large organization, right? So we're able to navigate very effectively. We have lines of communication into the right people within these organizations. So we really want the advisory teams to lean on us as it relates to any escalation issues, any real operational issues, things like that.
Let's lean into that for a second. This is really important for advisors who have not experienced the independent side yet. If one of your advisors has an issue with the recharacterization of a trust account, they need to get on the phone with one of the custodians, and it takes an hour and a half to get through. Are you saying that your team will help facilitate that, thus freeing up their staff?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, if I had this happen a couple of years ago, I'm having dinner with this advisor tonight. He called me and he rehashed the story, and I stopped him. I'm like, why did you spend an hour and a half on a call with one of our partners when you need to bring it to us? And that goes back to just communication, making sure we provide the right the right communication to the advisors, right? To have them understand where they stop and start and where we start and stop, right? So as it relates to your scenario, most definitely that would come to us. I would say it would probably start with our trust, with our planning organization. They would get involved to ensure that we're looking at things the right way, and then we would, behind the scenes, bring in the proper people to make sure that it's looked at appropriately, and then bring it to the custodian.
Are you using a support ticket system for that, or is the communication done via email?
We're using things like Slack. We're certainly using email, but at the end of the day, we are trying to keep as much communication not only online but documented as possible, right? And I think one of our colleagues is always out there looking for technology, looking to ensure that we have the right systems in place, and that's something we're going to be rolling out in the future, is some enhancements around our internal communications.
What is the ratio of support personnel to advisors?
That is a great question. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if we have, roughly, let's see, I'd say it's per advisor, it's probably 3 to 1.
It's an impressive number, 3 to 1.
Yeah, I believe so. I'd have to come back to you on that. 100% accurate, but I believe so.
Excellent. When it comes to compliance, how do you approach it as a firm?
That's a really good question. Yesterday, we did a call with a advisory team that's looking at us that, their core business is, we'll call it high net worth. Okay. And they're focused also on going ultra high net worth. And we haven't gotten into this yet, but we did a partnership with Russ Allen Prince, where he does a lot of work with very high end clients, and he's doing a lot of training, mentoring, coaching our advisors. And this particular advisory team that's thinking about joining us works with Russ Allen Prince, and the opportunities that are coming to this team are significant, but there's complexity. So what that's a long-winded, I haven't even answered your question yet, but the reason I bring that up is because what we're trying to do, and it goes back to the culture and the entrepreneurialism of our culture, is like, we want to understand what we're trying to accomplish here. So we're one of the staff members of the advisory team used to work in the wires, and she made the comment, typically they shoot first, ask questions later. We like to think we're the other way around. We want to understand what you're trying to accomplish. So I'd say from a compliance perspective, we're trying to be compliance. I use the words compliance appropriate, keeping in mind we're working with very entrepreneurial advisors. It's our responsibility to keep them out of harm's way. But many times they're trying to do something and they'll just try to do it, and then, meaning not go around us, but they're trying to figure out how to solve for something. And we're saying, like, well, what's the problem? Like, let's find out before we get to a solution. Let's talk about the problem and understand how we can get you there within the confines of our compliance guardrails, right? So the typical advisory team that's with us is pretty significant in terms of revenue. They're working with very sophisticated clients. So our compliance infrastructure is really, built upon this more broad kind of profile, if you will, and being able to work within the confines of the regulatory world and making sure that they're not stepping on anything. So, it's not, I think hopefully that answers your question, but I think one of the ways that you can look at this is when our advisors get a call from our compliance team, they're not sitting there thinking they're in trouble, right? I think that's typically what you see or feel on the other side, on the captive, in the wires and some of the other places, that when compliance is knocking, what did I do? I don't necessarily feel our advisors feel that way.
Yeah. Rob, is the named chief compliance officer an employee of the firm?
Yes. Yeah. We have a chief compliance officer. We have a compliance staff internal. It's pretty significant. We do lean on outsource resources on the legal side in various areas, just to, make sure that we have a sound understanding of what's going on. I mean, like just these rules and regs. I mean, something came out this morning in terms of, fiduciary standard and a few other things. It's like, I don't know how these advisors can stay on top of things. I don't know how small RIAs can keep ahead of this. Right. So we built a pretty significant infrastructure to support.
All right, let's talk about transition support. It's incredibly important when I'm coaching an advisor through the due diligence process. We ask these questions, but I also have them cold call people who have moved to the firm in the last 12 months to really
Sure.
get the true story, because I find a lot of times it's easy to mislead advisors as to how robust your transition support team is.
Yeah.
So let's dig in. How many transitions have you completed in the last couple of years?
Well, let me back up even further. Again, we went independent in 2016. At that point, 3.5 billion. I think it was something like 15,000 accounts or something. I don't know exactly, but that team that helped transition out of Lincoln is still in place today. And again, we went from 97 advisors to 212 today, from 3.5 billion to 18. Right. So there's been significant transition kind of experience, if you will. We're battle tested in a big way. We've probably done over the last 3 years, I would say we probably have done 50 transitions. Now, there may be groups where there's multiple advisors, but I think at the end of the day, we built a process. I personally think this across whether it's our organization or any other organization. If they have a plan, that's great. But the problem is the advisors tend to want to go off script. Right? And you laugh, but it's true, right? And I think it's funny because we talk about this all the time to the advisor. It's like, our goal is to keep you on point. And the head of our transition team has a very good knack for telling an advisor, hey, that's great, but we need to get, these 3 steps done first. Stay focused over here. A lot of advisors don't want to hear that. So it's one of those where I think that is a really important part of the puzzle. And in essence, you want to make sure that these steps, it's kind of like data. It's like garbage in, garbage out. It's the same thing. The work you're putting in up front is going to essentially align with your success on the back end, right? So we have to make sure it's done. To give you a sense of our transition, we typically need 4 to 6 weeks. And, we can tighten that up if need be, but typically that's what it is. And it could be for a 200 account. It could be for 2,000 account type scenario. But our goal, and we've been very successful, is moving once we, have that resignation day, license gets transferred. Typically, we're seeing 30 to 45 days. Everything is done. Assets are flowing in. That's our goal. What we've seen, which is interesting, is 9 times out of 10, the advisory team is picking up additional assets. And we provide a lot of resources around not just the transition, but we're providing a lot of marketing resources. We're helping with messaging. We're helping with websites, with the positioning. We're doing video work, because it's like anything, first impression, even though they have the relationship with the client, this is a new phase of the relationship. The first impression is huge. Let's make sure we get it right. And we have a lot of intellectual experience, like capital and experience, to understand what works and what doesn't. Now, every advisor is different. The relationships are different, but we're just saying, hey, this tends to work versus that. What do you want to do?
Yeah. If you're listening to this interview or watching this podcast and you take nothing else away from this interview, heed Rob's advice. If you're making a transition and you have a plan, you have to stick to it, because that is where all the problems happen. I have a couple more questions on transition. So
Sure.
How many will you tackle in a given quarter?
That's it's a goal of mine since the beginning of my career to have a very linear sales pipeline where things just close once a month, and I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I still fall in the trap. When things are good, I'm like, okay, finally I got it once a month, and it never stays like that.
Yep.
So that's a long-winded way of saying it's very chunky.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to look at opportunities that are over $100 million plus. So they tend to take a little bit more time. I mean, it could be anywhere from 3 to 5. It could be, for example, we've done 2 this year already. They've been pretty good size, but my wife always says this, which I laugh. She's been around me too long. She's like, your business is a second quarter game or second half game, right? And it is. It tends to be very, leading into like late third, fourth quarter of the year. That's when things really, really pick up. So last year we did over 3 billion of AUM that came in the door. That was attached to, I believe, around 40 advisors or so.
Okay. So the coaching I give advisors is just to ask the firm, when they have a target date, how many other advisors they would be transitioning at that time. So what's the most you have transitioned at one time?
Well, if I could just maybe expound on that for 1 second. So we're of the mindset that like the custodians have great resources and they're very helpful for transitions, but we're going to take the lead, right? Because chances are they have multiple transitions going on at the same time. We want to view this as the most important transition. So we're taking the lead on that, right? And we're essentially leveraging the resources of the custodians in addition to us, but we're always taking the lead. We've done probably, I think, 3 or 4 at the same time.
Okay.
But again, I mean, Jay, you and I have known each other for a long time. I'm not afraid to be direct. I mean, it's probably to a fault. East Coast guy in San Diego, it took quite a while for me to adjust. But I think it's one of those where I'm not going to sacrifice the client experience. If it's not going to work, we're going to hold off. Right. And if an advisory team can't understand that we need to wait maybe a week or 2 or something like that, there's probably a little bit of a deeper issue there.
Yep. Fair enough. Let's talk about economics. So I like to keep these at a high level for these interviews because there's always sensitivities and things change. But just in general terms, what terms do you use to describe your economics when you're talking to a new recruit?
Well, the first thing I talk about is, it goes back to what I was talking about before in terms of some of the criteria that we want from an advisory team. So if the first 3 or 4 questions are around payout, we're done. Well, it's just not like, that's not going to work. I mean, because look, it's a very important factor, but that shouldn't be the reason that, at least from our perspective of why you move. It should be one of, say, 10 things, certainly. But what I really want to instill into an advisory team when they're looking at us is let's have you really understand the resources of the firm, and then does it line up with the economics, right? Because we strongly believe that our pricing schematic is in line with the value we're bringing. So that's really our approach. And what we've done is we have, like many firms, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I can't imagine you're not going to go here, is a scale, right? As the revenue increases, we're bringing the economics more in line, more beneficial rather to the advisory team, right? Generally speaking, we have a payout structure and then a platform fee.
Okay. Any additional technology fees for the advisors?
Yes. Well, again, it's circumstantial. There's a couple ways in which we can kind of slice this, but generally what we're doing is we're passing on the tech costs at cost, right? So, we're I'd like to think, we've been told we're one of the fastest growing groups at Orion. We're one of the, top 20 firms within their client roster. We've been able to effectively build a pretty significant pricing arrangement with them. We're passing that on. We're not taking any sort of premium. I think that's something that should be asked if an advisory team is actually going to incur some tech costs. Question should be asked, is it actually true cost, or is the RIA embedding something in it? Because like anything, you see it across our industry all over the place. there's a lot of embedded fees, right? So what we're trying to do is leverage our economies of scale, pass it on to the advisory teams. But we have different ways we can price, right? We've got that payout structure, platform fee, tech costs, but there are some cases where we're seeing significant assets come in the door. They want us to manage those assets. We can wrap some pricing into that type of schematic as well. That goes back to the choice, the kind of the flexibility we have as an organization. We're certainly trying to create some scale, but at the same time, we know where we can be a little bit more customizable when we're talking about some significant assets.
How is your fee billing structured for the client?
Can you expand a little bit on that
Are you
question?
charging quarterly or monthly in advance or arrears?
I see. Okay. We for advisory, it's quarterly. For brokerage, it's monthly through LPL. We are flexible in terms of advance or arrears. That's something that we've done. We made that modification last year.
Do your advisors own their book of business?
They do own their book of business. If I could just go back to that one question you had about billing. So we built out a proprietary billing, kind of a fee engine, if you will, so that the advisors can go in and look at their book of business, look at, all fees, all commissions and everything. It's a homegrown system that we built. They can go in and look at things, build reports. So that's part of the service that we're providing. So I just wanted to mention that.
Excellent. What about ownership of their book of business?
Sorry, thank you. I forgot that question. So the advisors own their book of business. They are free to pick up and leave at any given time. I will say there's one caveat to that, which is our CPA program. The CPAs are referring over their clients to the advisors. So what we did is we've had to put some protections in place for the CPAs to say that they own their clients. Now, there's a revenue stream, obviously, that the advisor is getting from that client, from the referral. The advisor owns that that revenue stream. And if they wanted to leave, they could sell that revenue stream back to an advisor at Integrated, back to the CPA at market multiple, right? We haven't had anybody test that, but it's the way it's structured. But we had to put protections in place for the CPAs. And, really very, very rarely does an advisor have an issue with that. But as it relates to their book of business, anything they cultivate direct, they can pick up and leave anytime they want.
Okay. A couple of questions that are really specific to your firm. So sure. First, could you talk a little bit about Matt Ackerman and the marketing deliverables for advisors, not only pre-transition, during the transition, and once they're affiliated with your firm? Because I do think that's a differentiator.
Have you ever met a person who has more energy than Matt Ackerman?
Not possible.
So Matt, for those listening, Matt's been in the industry for a long, long time. Really well known in the RIA space. Worked for Investment News. He did all the major interviews with the titans of our industry. He did some really cool. He did these things called RIA Makeover, where he's helping RIAs essentially kind of make over, if they rebuild their RIAs, things like that, practices. We brought Matt in as our chief content officer about 4 years ago, with the idea that he can really help amplify on the marketing side for our advisors. So his day-to-day is really consisting of building out content and helping advisors predominantly from a social media, podcast, webinar perspective, things like that. So he's really helped up the game of a lot of advisory teams. So that's a big part of our marketing resource. In addition, we built out our own wholly owned sub-marketing company called InTouch Innovations. InTouch is taking a lot of that content and essentially delivering it to the client and prospect base of advisors, of CPA clients, and essentially providing analytics back to the advisor to understand who's looking at what. But at the end of the day, between our marketing company, InTouch, Matt Ackerman building the content, delivering it, social media, whatever it may be, we're trying to essentially create a very repeatable, sustainable marketing strategy, if you will, for advisory teams to drip on their existing clients, prospects, be top of mind.
Yeah. And For viewers and listeners, from my experience, it's one of the most robust internal marketing programs I've seen. Let's pivot to the CPA program. I think that's actually how you and I got introduced. I saw what was going on and reached out to you because I wanted to get a deeper understanding. It truly is unique. What do advisors need to know about the CPA program?
Yeah, that's one of our cornerstones of the business. So again, back when Paul Saganey, our founder, decided to build the business, he felt it was a great opportunity to partner with CPAs. So the idea is that we're taking a CPA firm and we're taking an advisory team and we're bringing them together. And that CPA is introducing their highest net worth clients to the advisors, and the advisors are leveraging our infrastructure to support that client. So what we've been able to essentially harness over time is this, again, repeatable process where we're going in, we have a team at Integrated that goes out, identifies CPA partners, or the advisor already has CPAs, but they might not necessarily be as effective as they want it to be. We're bringing those CPAs into the program. And part of that is to have the CPA understand what the program's all about, understand the process, how to work with advisors, what type of clients work. So we're doing all that work in many cases before the advisory team is even being introduced, right? So if we've got a new advisory team, we had one just join a little while ago. They were looking for a CPA. We actually found one pretty quickly. Where what we did is while the advisory team was joining us, we were spending time with that CPA, having them understand all the intricacies of our program, how they should work with advisors, what's most effective, and then spending time to understand what type of clients would actually benefit the most, right? So conversely, what we're doing though is we're spending time with the advisory team, same thing. We're having them understand the best approach with the CPA partner, the best approach with the clients, again, looking at it from a planning engine or planning perspective, very holistic in the approach, which CPAs very much appreciate. And we've been able to really unlock quite a significant amount of opportunity, particularly as you move up, again, that complexity curve, where these opportunities will be referred over by CPAs. And what's happened in that space, very interesting, is they're also going through this massive consolidation in the CPA side of things. And wealth management seems to be a revenue stream, obviously, that's very appealing because of the recurring nature of our business. So you've got a lot of these CPA firms that want to build out a wealth management arm. But I said it before that the compliance and legal environment right now it's very fluid. It's always been. There's some risk associated with it. So a lot of CPAs, they look at it, they decide that might not be worth it. What we've been able to effectively do is go into a CPA firm and build out that wealth management arm. And we are that wealth management arm underneath the hood, but we provide them the opportunity to brand that wealth management. So in other words, let's say it's ABC Tax, ABC CPA firm, they're building out ABC Wealth Management. We're helping them brand it, website, messaging, so on and so forth. And then we're taking the advisory team and we're tucking them or bringing them in to that brand, into that DBA. So the clients don't see any sort of bifurcation. They see it as an extension of the CPA firm. They were offering tax, now they're offering wealth management. So it's a very seamless approach. And then there's significant consistency in terms of how the advisors work with those clients, which obviously gives the CPA a significant amount of confidence.
Rob, let's wrap up with some tough questions.
Sure.
What can you tell me about the retention rate at your firm?
That's not a tough one. We are 97, 98%. We haven't lost an advisor in quite some time. I'd say the reason we do lose advisors, if we do, is that, again, it goes back to the value, right? Are they leveraging us? Are they planning oriented? Early on, we did lose a couple of advisors because they came in, I'd say, on us, we didn't necessarily do the right vetting in terms of what they value the most. But we're very proud of our ability to retain advisors. Again, they can pick up and leave at any time. We're only as good as the last trade, and we're doing pretty good.
Do you currently have a capital partner at Integrated?
We do not.
And then what is the stated exit strategy for the organization?
They're really, that's an interesting question in the way you pose it, because I don't view us having an exit strategy. We would like this firm to continue on, even, when Paul decides to retire, and ultimately, myself and everybody else, right? We just really appreciate what we built and the support we provide, and conversely is the advisors' appreciation and the clients that they serve. So we want to just continue down this path. Going back to your capital question, I mean, would we ever get a partner? I think perhaps we would in the future, but it's one in which we are not going to lose control of the firm. We are not going to go down, most likely, like a private equity scenario where that firm owns, a majority of our firm, and then suddenly they're making decisions that sacrifice the quality of the deliverable, meaning of the value that we're bringing, that is going to cause disruption for the client. Like, that's not us. We take pride in the ability to support advisors, the value we bring, our support structure we feel is unique. If we were ever to go with a partner, they have to be aligned with that. We will not lose control.
Let's finish with a success story. Can you give us an example of an advisor or team that affiliated with Integrated Partners and were able to grow as a result of the partnership?
Sure. We have, he's one of my favorite people. He's in Boston. He had a very successful career, was working in a captive environment, where he just could not leave with his clients, probably 7-8 years ago. Decided to pick up and move. Everyone thought he was crazy to do it, and ultimately joined us with very little of any assets when he started. And what was most amazing is that he worked very closely with Paul Saganey and a number of our senior members of our team to help build process. Quickly got a CPA, really started ramping, spent a lot of time with Paul Saganey in terms of coaching and learning, again, how to unlock higher end wealth. Ultimately grabbed another CPA, and today he's one of our largest advisors. And he's doubled his book a number of times. It's just amazing. And he unlocked this blueprint for growth. And he did it by leveraging our infrastructure. He works very closely with these CPA firms today. He outsources the wealth or the asset management to us, frees his time up, where he's very focused on working with a subset of clients. And what he's done with our help is built out a business model where he is focused on, let's say, 5 million and above investable assets, and then brings in what we call a second chair. It's like a junior advisor from, say, 1 to 5 million. And then we have actually somebody underneath that. And he's essentially created this business model where he segmented his business in terms of client size. He focuses on what he does best. He outsources a lot of the other things to us. And he's just absolutely crushed it. And he's a great guy. And it's a real testament to the organization.
Awesome. Rob, thanks so much for coming on RIA Stories. If somebody wanted to go deeper with Integrated Partners, what's the best way to reach out to you in the organization?
Best way to reach out to us is certainly you can go onto our website, integrated-partners.com. Reach out to me through either social media or our website. There's a lot of content out there, but certainly we'd be interested in chatting with anybody that has an interest.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it.